The memory still lingers like a bad dream I can't wake up from. Whenever I hear the soft ding of an incoming ride request, my stomach tightens. I don't drive for Uber anymore, not after what happened that night. It started as an ordinary evening. I had just finished a long shift at work, exhausted but eager to get home. The streets were dimly lit, and a thin mist curled around the streetlights. My bus had already left, so I pulled out my phone and called an Uber. A black Chevy Equinox pulled up a few minutes later. The name on the app said Jason, and his rating was high. I hesitated for a second, but exhaustion won. I opened the door, slid into the back seat, and buckled up. "Hey," I said, forcing a polite tone. Jason barely acknowledged me. His hands were tight on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale under the dim dashboard lights. His profile picture had seemed normal, but now, sitting behind him, something about him felt off. The car smelled faintly metallic, almost like gunpowder. I brushed it off. Maybe it was just a strong air freshener. I didn't know yet, but I had just stepped into the most terrifying ride of my life. The drive started quietly. No small talk, just the hum of the engine and the occasional swoosh of passing cars. I was fine with that. Some drivers weren't chatty. But then, things started to feel wrong. Jason accelerated too fast at a green light, then slammed the brakes so suddenly I was thrown forward. "Everything okay?" I asked. His grip on the wheel tightened. He let out a short, humorless chuckle. "Yeah, the app's just been acting weird tonight." I didn't know what he meant, but I wasn't in the mood to ask. I glanced at my phone, checking how much longer I had to endure this ride. 12 minutes. It felt like forever. Then his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a notification, and I saw something shift in his expression. His jaw clenched, his breathing deepened. "You ever feel like something's controlling you?" Jason muttered, his voice eerily calm. A cold unease settled in my chest. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he exhaled sharply and shook his head, almost as if he had said too much. I stared at the rearview mirror, my reflection blending with his dark eyes. I had a terrible feeling I needed to get out of that car. Jason's phone buzzed again. This time he grabbed it without hesitation, holding it to his ear with one hand while the other gripped the wheel. "Yeah," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. Then a pause. "It's done. The next one?" The words barely registered before my stomach dropped. "The next one?" Jason listened for a moment, nodding slightly as if receiving instructions. My mouth felt dry. This wasn't a normal conversation. Then, without warning, he slammed his foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, throwing me against the seat. My pulse pounded in my ears as streetlights blurred past. "Hey, slow down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Jason didn't react. He ended the call and let the phone slip onto the passenger seat. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel, as if following some silent rhythm. "You know," he said suddenly, "sometimes I feel like I'm just a passenger too." I had no idea what that meant, but every instinct in me screamed, "Get out now!" I reached for the door handle, but when I pulled, it didn't budge. The doors were locked. I tried not to panic. Maybe it was a child lock. Maybe I wasn't pulling hard enough. "Something wrong?" Jason asked, his voice too casual, too detached. I forced a laugh, trying to mask my fear. "Yeah, just realized I left something at work. Think you could drop me back?" Jason didn't respond. His fingers kept drumming, slow, deliberate. The GPS said we were 5 minutes from my apartment, but I knew now that I wasn't going home. I had to think fast. I fumbled for my phone, pretending to answer a call. Yeah, I'm almost there," I said loudly, hoping he'd take the hint that someone was waiting for me. "You're outside already? Cool. I'll be there in..." Jason chuckled, a low, chilling chuckle. "You don't have to do that," he said, eyes flicking to me in the rearview mirror. "Nobody's waiting for you." My blood turned to ice. I didn't know how he knew that. I didn't care. I just knew I had to get out of that car before it was too late. The car sped down an empty road, streetlights flickering past in eerie flashes. I tried to steady my breathing, but my hands were shaking. Jason wasn't just an odd driver. Something was seriously wrong. I glanced toward the front seat, searching for anything that could give me an advantage. That's when I saw it. A duffel bag on the passenger seat. The zipper was slightly open, just enough for me to see what was inside. A gun, a bulletproof vest. My body went numb. Jason must have noticed my stare because his fingers stopped drumming. He tilted his head slightly, just enough for me to see his grin in the mirror. You shouldn't have seen that. My chest tightened. Every muscle in my body screamed for me to run, to do something. I needed to get out. Now. I didn't think. I just acted. With one sharp motion, I reached for the door handle again and pulled with all my strength. Still locked. Jason exhaled like a disappointed teacher. You really should have stayed quiet. He reached toward the duffel bag. I had seconds. The car slowed slightly as he turned onto a side street. This was my only chance. I braced myself and threw my entire body against the door, kicking at it as hard as I could. The lock gave. The door swung open. Without hesitation, I launched myself out of the car, hitting the pavement hard. Pain shot through my body as I rolled onto the asphalt, scraping my arms and legs. Behind me, Jason's car screeched to a halt. For a split second, I thought he was going to chase me. Instead, he just sat there, watching. Then, as another car turned onto the road, he suddenly sped off into the night, disappearing into the darkness. I lay there, gasping for breath, heart hammering in my chest. I was alive, but I wasn't safe yet. I forced myself onto shaky legs, my whole body throbbing from the fall. My hands were scraped raw, my knees burned, but I didn't care. I was alive. I stumbled toward the nearest building, a small gas station, its fluorescent lights flickering weakly. The clerk behind the counter looked up, eyes widening as he saw my state. "You okay, man?" he asked, stepping forward. I could barely form the words. "Call 911. He didn't hesitate. As he grabbed the phone, I turned to look outside, half expecting to see Jason's car lurking in the distance. But the road was empty. The seconds stretched endlessly as I waited. I kept replaying the ride in my head, every little detail, every warning sign I ignored. The way Jason locked the doors, the way he talked about the app, the gun in the duffel bag. A chill ran through me. He had a plan. I was supposed to be part of it, and I had almost let it happen. The police arrived in minutes. I told them everything. Jason's name, the model of his car, the route he took. One officer listened intently while another spoke urgently into his radio. Then, the part that made my stomach drop. The officer looked up from his notepad, his expression unreadable. "We've been looking for him." I stared at him. "What?" He nodded grimly. "Jason Dalton. He's already killed tonight." A sick wave of nausea rolled over me. I wasn't just in the wrong car. I had been sitting next to a serial killer. That night, I learned the full story. Jason had gone on a shooting spree, randomly killing people between picking up Uber passengers. He shot a woman, left her for dead, then continued accepting rides. Hours later, he murdered a father and son at a car dealership, then a group of women at a Cracker Barrel, and through it all he kept driving, kept picking up passengers like nothing had happened, like I was just another stop. Jason was arrested later that night, found wearing a bulletproof vest with multiple firearms. He later claimed that the Uber app had taken control of his body, that a horned cow-headed figure was giving him orders. I don't know if he truly believed that, and honestly, I don't care, because what really haunts me? His last words before he drove away. "You were never meant to leave." Even now I wonder, if I hadn't jumped out of that car, if I had hesitated just a second longer, would I have been his next victim? I guess I'll never know, and I never want to. The cold night air clung to my skin as I stepped out of the building, exhausted from my 11-hour shift. My feet ached, and the thought of waiting for a taxi felt unbearable. I pulled out my phone and, for the first time, ordered an Uber. The request was accepted instantly, too fast. The driver was already close, barely a block away. Maybe he had just dropped someone off nearby, I reasoned. A black sedan rolled up to the curb. Something felt off. It had no rear license plate. My gut twisted, a quiet warning whispering in the back of my mind. But exhaustion won over instinct, and I opened the door, sliding into the back seat. The driver didn't greet me, didn't ask for my name. He just stared at the road ahead, hands gripping the wheel. Hi, I mumbled, fastening my seatbelt. The car didn't move. A strange silence stretched between us. I checked my phone. The app showed the ride was in progress, but we were still parked. I cleared my throat. Are we good to go? Only then did the driver shift into gear. Streetlights flickered past the window as the car glided through the city. I leaned back, muscles unwinding, letting the exhaustion take over. My eyelids grew heavy. A harsh thud jolted me awake. I straightened, heart pounding. The city was gone. Thick forest surrounded us, the road now a narrow, twisting path. Tall trees loomed on either side, their branches clawing at the sky. My stomach turned cold. This wasn't the way home. I checked my phone. No signal. The app still showed my destination, but the map was wrong. The blue line twisted into empty space, like the road we were on didn't even exist. I forced my voice to stay calm. Hey, I think we're off route. The driver didn't respond. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel. I shifted uneasily. Can you just drop me off? Here is fine. Finally, he spoke, his voice a hollow whisper. He has other plans for you. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight on my chest. I swallowed hard, pulse hammering in my ears. Who are you talking about? The driver didn't answer. The road ahead swallowed the headlights, an endless stretch of black. A deep unease settled over me. I wasn't alone in the car. Something shifted beside me. I turned my head slowly, heart slamming against my ribs. The back seat had been empty when I got in, I was sure of it. But now, a figure sat next to me. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The shape was barely there, just a distortion in the darkness. But then, twin points of light blinked open, eyes glowing faintly like embers in the dark. I sucked in a sharp breath. The figure's face was hollow, stretched impossibly thin like the skin barely clung to the skull beneath. I was staring into something that shouldn't exist, my body locked up in sheer terror. The driver spoke again, his voice even lower this time. A new destination. We're almost there. Panic surged through me. My hands fumbled for the door handle. Locked. Let me out. My voice cracked. The driver didn't react. The thing beside me just watched. I pressed against the door, trying to put as much distance between me and the figure as possible. The air inside the car felt wrong, like it was pressing down on me, heavy and thick. I forced my shaking fingers to open the Uber app. Maybe I could send my location to someone. No service. The speedometer in the front flickered, 160 km/h. The trees outside blurred past in a dizzying streak of black and green. My mind raced. Jumping out at this speed was suicide. Think. I need to use the bathroom, I blurted out. Seriously, can we stop? Nothing. The thing beside me tilted its head as if amused. The others will welcome you, the driver murmured, voice almost reverent. Once this is over. I gritted my teeth. I wasn't going to let this be the end. A car approached from the opposite direction, its headlights cutting through the darkness. For a split second, the interior of the Uber was fully illuminated, and that's when I saw it. The figure beside me wasn't just thin, it was stitched together. Its skin was a patchwork of fresh wounds, jagged stitches running across its cheeks, down its neck, and disappearing beneath a tattered shirt. The skin didn't even match. Some parts were pale, others dark, like a sickening quilt of stolen flesh. My stomach twisted violently. Then it smiled. A slow, deliberate movement, the corners of its mouth pulling up, except the stitches barely held, causing the flesh to strain against the thread. A cold hand reached out, fingers brushing through my hair. The whisper came next. "He will be delighted to meet you." Something inside me snapped. I lunged forward, hands grabbing for the steering wheel. The driver was unnaturally strong. With a single arm, he shoved me back like I was nothing. My head hit the window, stars bursting in my vision. The car swerved wildly but stayed on the road, still speeding toward wherever they were taking me. I screamed for help, knowing full well no one would hear me. Then, a miracle. A distant wail of sirens, flashing blue and red lights appeared behind us. The driver's knuckles tightened on the wheel, his posture shifting. For the first time, he looked tense. The police car sped up, pulling alongside us. A megaphone crackled to life. "Pull over, now." The Uber slowed, drifting to the side of the road. My breath came fast and ragged. This was my only chance. The officer stepped out, flashlight in hand, and approached the driver's side window. I could barely breathe as he peered inside. And then, he saw me. His eyes flicked to my face, taking in the pure terror etched there. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for his belt and pulled out his handcuffs. Without hesitation, he yanked the door open and clamped them around my wrists. "Step out of the vehicle, you're under arrest." My mind reeled until he leaned in and whispered just for me to hear, "I know you need help." The officer's grip on my arm was firm as he led me away from the car. My heart pounded, my breaths shallow and ragged. I didn't resist. I didn't speak. I just let him pull me toward the police cruiser, desperate to put distance between me and whatever sat in the back of that Uber. When we reached the patrol car, he quickly unlocked the cuffs and turned me to face him. His expression was serious, but there was something else in his eyes, something that told me he knew. "What the hell is going on?" I rasped. His gaze flicked back to the Uber. I followed his eyes and my stomach dropped. The car was empty, no driver, no stitched passenger. The back door swung open slightly, creaking on its hinges, but the seats were bare. I shook my head. No, they were there. "I believe you." The officer's voice was calm, steady. "But that car? It's not registered. No plates, no record of your ride in the system. As far as Uber's concerned, you were never picked up." The words hit me like a brick. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling. Opened the app, checked my ride history. Nothing. Not a single trip recorded. I could still feel that thing's fingers in my hair, the whisper in my ear. The officer sighed. "You're not the first." I looked up, throat tightening. "What?" "There have been other reports, stories like yours, but we've never caught anyone. Never found the car." His jaw clenched. "It always just vanishes." A cold shiver ran through me. He patted my shoulder lightly, like he knew I needed something to anchor me back to reality. "You're lucky you flagged me down. Most people don't get that chance." I swallowed hard, nodding. He offered me a ride home, and for the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate to get into a police car. It took years before I could take another Uber. Even now, every time I get in, I check the plates, check the driver's face, watch the app like my life depends on it. Because I know somewhere out there, that car is still driving, still picking up passengers, still heading to a destination that no one comes back from. The night air was cool against my skin as I stepped onto the sidewalk, the distant echoes of laughter and music fading behind me. My friends had begged me to stay, but exhaustion weighed heavy on my body. My phone's battery blinked at 5%. just enough to order an Uber. A black sedan slowed down in front of me, headlights cutting through the dimly lit street. I glanced at the screen one last time. The plate looked right, at least I thought it did. The driver, a man in his late 20s or early 30s, gave a small nod. He didn't say my name. That should have been my first red flag. Uber for... My voice trailed off, waiting for him to confirm. Yeah, get in, he muttered. Something about his tone made me hesitate. The logical part of my brain whispered that I should double-check. But my phone was dying, and standing alone at night didn't feel like a better option. I pulled the door handle and stepped inside. The doors locked automatically. My stomach tightened. The car rolled forward, the familiar streets blurring past the window. I leaned back, letting out a slow breath. Home wasn't far, just a quick ride through downtown, then a straight shot to my apartment. Except the driver turned left instead of right. I frowned. Hey, I think you missed the turn. No response. My pulse quickened. I checked my phone, 1% battery. I tapped the screen, trying to refresh the Uber app, but it wouldn't load. Excuse me? I tried again, my voice sharper this time. This isn't the way to my place. The man's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He glanced at me through the rear-view mirror, then back at the road. Shortcut, he said flatly. Everything inside me screamed that this wasn't normal. The buildings outside grew sparser, the streetlights becoming fewer and farther between. My mouth went dry. I reached for the door handle. It didn't budge. The child lock was on. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the locked door handle. My breathing grew shallow. I tried to steady my voice. Can you unlock the door? I don't feel comfortable. No answer. The driver's grip on the wheel tightened, his knuckles pale under the dim glow of the dashboard. The road stretched into darkness, no other cars in sight. Hey, I need to get out. My voice cracked. I pressed the lock button, but nothing happened. The man hummed. A slow, eerie tune, as if he hadn't heard me at all. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I forced a smile, trying to mask my panic. Look, if this is a mistake, just drop me off here. No problem, okay? Still nothing. Just the hum of the engine and that unsettling melody under his breath. I shifted in my seat, my mind racing. If I didn't do something now, I might never get another chance. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to act, but fear rooted me to the seat. The car slowed slightly as we approached a stop sign. My fingers curled into fists. This was my chance. I yanked at the door handle with all my strength. Nothing. I kicked at it, hoping to break it open, but the lock held firm. The driver's head snapped toward me. Sit still. His voice was sharp now, the calm act dropping. No. I threw my body forward, reaching for the steering wheel. If I couldn't get out, I could make sure he wouldn't drive any farther. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist in an iron grip. His fingers dug into my skin as he pulled me back hard. Calm down, he growled. I did the only thing I could think of. I bit down on his hand. Hard. He yelped, jerking away for just a second. Just enough. I reached for the lock again, my fingers shaking. Click. The door swung open. The door flew open and I hurled myself out of the moving car. The pavement came fast. Too fast. I hit the ground hard, my body rolling across the asphalt. A sharp pain shot through my knee, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Headlights bathed me in a blinding glow as the car screeched to a halt. My pulse pounded in my ears. Get up. Run. I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring the burning pain in my scraped palms. The sound of a car door opening sent a bolt of terror through me. Footsteps. Heavy, fast, coming right for me. I bolted. The street was empty, but up ahead, houses. A row of them, their windows dark. I sprinted toward the closest one, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, tires screeched. The car was moving again. I reached the front porch, nearly collapsing against the door. My fist pounded against the wood. Help, please, help me! A porch light flickered on. Shadows shifted behind the window. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The black sedan had stopped in the middle of the street. The driver was still inside, staring at me. The door creaked open and an older man stepped out. Confusion and concern etched on his face. "What the hell is going on?" My lips parted, but before I could speak, the car's tires screeched. The driver hit the gas and vanished down the road. Gone. My knees buckled and I collapsed onto the porch, my entire body trembling. The man helped me inside, his wife already on the phone with the police. I clutched the armrest of the couch, barely processing what had just happened. Minutes felt like hours. Then flashing red and blue lights filled the window. The nightmare was over, or so I thought. The police questioned me for what felt like forever. My words tumbled out in frantic bursts, about the wrong turn, the locked doors, the way he grabbed my wrist. I showed them my Uber app, but my ride had been canceled. The real driver never arrived. He was waiting for someone, one of the officers muttered, scribbling notes. He saw an opportunity. A chill ran through me. They took my phone, checked the logs, and sent out a bolo, be on the lookout for the black sedan. But by the time they found it, hours later, it was empty, abandoned in an alley. Inside, duct tape, rope, a knife. I didn't want to know what would have happened if I hadn't escaped. The driver, never caught. For weeks, I barely slept. Every sound outside my window sent my heart racing. Every passing car made my stomach twist. I never take a rideshare alone anymore. I always check the license plate twice. And if the driver doesn't say my name first, I don't get in because I was lucky. But the next person might not be. The night had a suffocating stillness, the kind that made the city feel abandoned despite the distant hum of traffic. I was just another Uber driver blending into the shadows, watching passengers come and go like fleeting ghosts. When the request popped up on my screen, I hesitated. The pickup location was in a rough part of town, the kind where people vanish without a trace. But a job was a job. As I pulled up to the curb, my headlights carved through the darkness, revealing a man hunched over on the sidewalk. He was frail, too thin, too jittery, like a marionette whose strings had been frayed. His hands shook as he climbed into the back seat, mumbling something under his breath. The ride was silent aside from his labored breathing. I caught glimpses of him in the mirror. Sweat glistened on his pale forehead, his fingers tapping nervously against his knee. "You okay, man?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Yeah," he muttered. "Just drive." His destination was a decaying house with boarded-up windows and a sagging porch. As I slowed to a stop, he fumbled for cash with unsteady hands, shoving a crumpled bill toward me. "Keep the change," he mumbled, slipping out into the darkness. I exhaled, relieved to be rid of him. But just as I pulled away, something on the roadside caught my eye. A figure, small, motionless, barely illuminated by my taillights. My grip on the wheel tightened. Something was very wrong. I eased the car to a stop, my heart thudding against my ribs. The figure wasn't just some discarded trash or a pile of old clothes. It was a girl. She lay curled in the dirt, her arms wrapped around herself as if warding off the cold. Her skin was pale beneath the grime, her dark hair tangled and unkempt. Stepping out, I called to her. "Hey, you okay?" She twitched, her head jerking up. Hollow eyes locked onto mine. "Go away," she rasped. Her voice was raw, like she hadn't spoken in days. She tried to sit up, but her limbs trembled under her own weight. I crouched down, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I can take you somewhere safe. A shelter, maybe." A dry, humorless laugh rattled from her throat. "Safe? That's funny." Something inside me twisted. Pity, maybe. Frustration. I'd spent years trying to shape young minds, to guide them towards something better. But this girl, she was too far gone. "You don't have to be out here," I said. Her expression shifted, mocking, almost cruel. "And what do you know about it? You think I'm some tragic little thing waiting for a savior?" She leaned closer, her breath laced with something sour. "I'm not lost," she whispered. "I chose this." A sharp sting of something indescribable spread through my chest. Anger? Disgust? No, something deeper. My fingers twitched. The streetlights flickered above us. The world narrowed to just me and her. Before I realized what I was doing, my hands were on her throat, and she stopped struggling. The moment stretched, unreal and soundless. Her body had gone limp beneath my grip, her chest no longer rising, no longer fighting. A strange calm settled over me, a silence so deep it felt like the entire city had paused to watch. I pulled my hands away. Her eyes remained open, dark, empty pools that once held defiance, now vacant. The streetlights buzzed above, their glow casting an eerie halo around her lifeless frame. I should have panicked. I should have felt regret, but I didn't. Instead, a slow realization crept in. She was still, peaceful, no longer lost. I couldn't just leave her there. The bushes lining the roadside provided temporary cover. I worked quickly, methodically, dragging her body into the thick undergrowth, ensuring no stray limb was left exposed. The city had a way of swallowing its forgotten souls. Tonight she was just another one. But I wasn't finished. As I drove home, my mind churned with possibilities. A body left to decay was a body lost to time, forgotten, meaningless. That couldn't happen to her. I needed to preserve her. My house was quiet when I returned, the silence pressing in as I carried her inside. The steps were careful, deliberate. Years of academic precision guided my hands, every motion precise, every detail accounted for. The basement became my sanctuary. I had the tools, the knowledge. Teaching forensic sciences for over a decade had left me with an intimate understanding of preservation. I worked through the night. Chemicals seeped into her skin, halting decay. Her hair remained soft, her lips unbroken, as if she were only asleep. When it was done, I stepped back. Ariadna. That was the name on her ID. 19 years old. A life ahead of her, wasted on dark alleyways and strangers who never cared to know her name. But I knew it. I whispered it to her as I placed her gently in the spare room. The bed was made, the curtains drawn. She belonged here now. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Days passed. My routine remained unchanged. Pick up riders, drive through the night, return home to her. But then, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a faint creaking in the house when I was sure I was alone, a whisper of movement where there should have been none. One night I woke abruptly, heart hammering. The sound was unmistakable, breathing, but I lived alone. I turned toward the hallway, toward the locked door of the spare room. A shadow passed underneath it. I didn't move. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the sliver of darkness beneath the door. The air in my room felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't explain. It had to be my mind playing tricks on me. Fatigue, stress, anything but the impossible. But then, the doorknob turned. A slow, deliberate click echoed through the silence. The door remained shut, but the message was clear. I wasn't alone. For the first time since that night, fear slithered beneath my skin. I forced myself to my feet, creeping toward the hallway. My fingers trembled as they wrapped around the knob. I twisted it open, fast, bracing for something, anything. But the room was empty. Ariadna lay exactly as I left her, preserved in the stillness of time. Her lips slightly parted, her dark hair carefully brushed, her hollow eyes. No, they weren't hollow anymore. They were looking at me. I stumbled back, knocking into the wall. It wasn't possible. I had sealed her fate with my own hands. There was no life left in her. But the air was colder now. The walls felt tighter, the room smaller. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, staring. Minutes, hours. The only thing I knew for certain was that I needed to get out. That night, I picked up another ride. The city felt different, muted, distant, like I was driving through a dream. I barely registered the new request when it popped up. My mind was still trapped in that room, in those eyes. I stopped at the pickup location. A young woman slid into the back seat. "Good evening," she murmured. I froze. Her voice, the timbre, the rhythm, familiar. I glanced in the mirror and my blood turned to ice. Ariadna. No, it couldn't be. But the girl in my back seat was identical to her, down to the smudges of dirt along her collarbone, the deep, knowing stare. She leaned forward, her breath cool against my ear. "I remember you," she whispered. My hands clenched the wheel. My vision blurred. I blinked once, twice. She was gone. The seat was empty. My breath came in sharp, ragged gasps as I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the dark, endless road ahead. I slammed the car into drive and sped home. When I burst through the door, the house felt colder than ever. The hallway stretched longer, the walls pressing in. I reached the spare room, threw the door open, and there she was. Still, silent, exactly where I left her. Except this time her lips were curled into a faint, knowing smile.